Hi, I'm Bradley Check. I'm a collector of vintage arcade games. We're at the Neville Public Museum in downtown Green Bay, Wisconsin. Welcome to the golden age of video arcade games. This game is called Berserk. It's made by Stern in 1980. The unique thing about this game is its bat stick controller. These came standard on the game, however, they're an optical joystick. When kids would, back in the day in the arcade, spill soda inside the joystick assembly, the optics would get clogged up and the game would be unworkable. So when operators would come to collect the money, nobody had been playing it. That's lost revenue. So most of the time they would take the joystick out and put in a standard joystick, making these today very, very rare. This is Asteroids by Atari. It came out in 1979 and went on to become Atari's biggest hit. This game has a vector monitor. It uses vector graphics, which differed from the time because most games were raster graphics. This was also the first video game I ever owned. I purchased it for $60 from an ad in the newspaper at the time. In 1980, Atari tried again with Asteroids, releasing Asteroids Deluxe. It differs slightly in that you have more of a backlit display and all the graphics have a blue gel overlay over the monitor to create a blue look even though it is a black and white monitor. Alright, this game is Donkey Kong. Obviously everybody remembers it as Nintendo's largest hit. It actually originally was in a red cabinet. That's because the game was originally Radar Scope. Radar Scope wasn't selling well, so they quickly came up with a different game and they came up with the concept of Donkey Kong. So some of the original Donkey Kongs are actually in red cabinets, but everybody knows them pretty much as the light blue cabinets. Donkey Kong Jr. came out as the sequel to Donkey Kong and is known as one of the best sequels to date. This is Atari's Fire Truck. It came out in the late 70s. It's a black and white game. However, it's a two-player game. The front player steers the front of the fire truck and the back player controls the tiller. There is also a horn button and a bell button back here. Both of those serve no purpose for the game other than making noise if you want to. One thing to note about the game that's interesting is that no matter how long you are on your way to the fire, in the game you never actually arrive at a fire. So you can play it for as long as you can stay alive, however, you never really reach a fire. This game is Food Fight, made by Atari. It's known for its incredibly colorful graphics and is probably one of the most colorful games that you would find from back in the golden age of video arcade games. One of the things unique to this game is its gimbal joystick. This joystick was only used on Food Fight and today is extremely hard to find. But in keeping with making sure everything is authentic and original, I was able to locate one of these joysticks to complete this restoration project. This game is Tron, well known obviously as one of the classics from back in the golden age of video arcade games. This game was an extensive restoration project. It was a massive hit back in the day, but unfortunately after it had lived out its time, a lot of these games were converted. This machine had actually been converted, which was, the common title was Two Tigers. So when I received it, it had some of the Two Tigers stuff left and some of the Tron stuff left over. I had to restore it back to its original condition, which can be incredibly expensive to do on this machine. However, when you see it with the black light displays and all the proper parts as well as a fully working Tron game, it's a very exciting and fun game. This game actually came out and coincided with the movie Tron, and it actually did better revenue-wise than the movie. This is Space Invaders. It was released by Midway in 1978. The game is actually a black and white game that has little color strips over the monitor to create color effect. This game was released in mid-1978, and by 1981, this title alone had earned over $1 billion in revenue, one quarter at a time. This game is called Skydiver. It's made by Atari. This is the only one I've ever seen in my life in all my years of collecting. It's got really unique controls with the rip cords that you pull and then go left or right based on the wind direction, and you try to land on the bases with your jumper. It's also got a unique marquee that has the different kind of Las Vegas style lighting. All right, this is Baby PacMan. It came out in 1982 and was the first hybrid game that Bally developed, which is a video and short pinball playfield. The object of the game is very similar with the Pac-Man. However, there are escape tunnels that when you go down them, it kicks in and engages the pinball. However, these games broke down a lot, so operators weren't a big fan of it because they were spending more time repairing them than people were actually playing them. In 1984, they tried once again with another hybrid game called Granny and the Gators. It was limited to 500 units and had moderate success at best, although I do find it to be a very fun game today. One thing in between those two, another manufacturer by the name of Gottlieb came out with a pinball video combination called Caveman. However, that's more of a pinball style format with a video screen in the playfield. This game is Death Race, made by Exidy back in 1976. The premise of the game is simple. You are the Grim Reaper driving around in a car, running over the little people, or as they call them in the game, gremlins. When you run them over, they scream and a tombstone pops up in their place. The object is to run as many of them over as possible. Back in 1976, this game was banned from production after 500 units because it was considered too violent. Today, Death Race machines are extremely collectible. This game is Mousetrap, made by Exidy back in 1981. It's very similar to Pac-Man. There are some variations to it. You have these different colored buttons that are operating gates that you can trap some of your enemies or protect yourself from them. You also have a dog button that when you collect a bone on the screen, it will turn you into a dog when you hit the button for about 5 seconds, and then you can eat the cats. Mousetrap is a very rare game and is probably one of my favorite games in my collection. It was also featured in a 1982 album by Buckner and Garcia called Pac-Man Fever. The song Mousetrap was the 7th track on the album. These are some of the games that I've chosen to be playable here at the Golden Age of Video Arcade Games exhibit. The reason why I chose these games was because it's a mix of popular games, games that are fun to play and that people remember, and games that are more easy to repair. Here's another section that shows some of the games I selected for the Playable Games sections. Alright, this is a completely custom-built arcade cabinet that is in the exact shape and specifications of a Ms. Pac-Man machine. It is made out of clear acrylic, enlisting some of the help from a friend of mine at Midland Plastics here in Green Bay, Wisconsin. This is a one-of-a-kind item that is made to showcase exactly what is inside each and every one of these machines to some degree. You're dealing with a transformer, power supply board, the main board, a monitor, control panel, coin door, marquee, and speaker. Basically, those are the main components of video games that you might see throughout this exhibit of that era. And you get to get a chance to come and see exactly what makes up a video game. The game Journey, made by Bally Midway in 1983, was the first band-themed video game. In the late 70s, there was a KISS pinball machine, but this was the first band-themed arcade game. Journey was not a very popular game back in the day, but today is very sought after among collectors. This game has been meticulously restored from ground up, and it actually features a cassette player inside the machine that when you get to the bonus round, it plays the song Separate Ways by Journey through the speakers on the game. This game is called Pong. It's the game that really started it all back in 1972. Prior to this, there was a game called Computer Space by Nutting Associates that came in a big fiberglass cabinet. But when Pong came out in 1972, it changed the dynamic of video games forever and went on to be a massive, massive hit. This is Dragon's Lair by Cinematronics. It came out in 1983. It was the first game that was Laserdisc. Laserdisc did go on to put on a number of different games by different manufacturers, and it has a certain collector niche. But this was the first one that started it all. It went on to spawn sequels such as Space Ace and Dragon's Lair 2. However, Dragon's Lair 2 didn't do nearly as well as its original. This was also the first game to charge 50 cents to play. This is Tapper, made by Bally Midway back in 1983. It was a Budweiser-themed video game, which caused problems because the game became a huge hit, but parents were outraged that it was endorsing underage drinking. In the following year, Bally Midway retooled it and called it Root Beer Tapper. Instead, now the bartender is serving mugs of root beer instead of beer. Well, today, root beer tappers are actually very rare. However, most collectors seek the original tapper. Within the same theme, this game, Timber, came out in 1984 using a very similar looking main character. This Timber itself is a very early production model, one of the first made at the factory, and underneath the side art you can actually see it is a root beer tapper that has been converted to an early version of Timber. This game is called Satan's Hollow. It was put out by Bally Midway in 1982. This game was similar to Tron with the black light display that lit up the joystick in the dark arcades. This game actually was banned from certain arcades due to its title that was a little sketchy at the time. So Satan's Hollow machines sometimes were not actually allowed in the arcades. This is Star Wars. Star Wars was released by Atari in both an upright and a sit-down cockpit version. The cockpit version actually had a 25-inch vector monitor in it. Today, collectors seek out Star Wars games in general. However, the cockpit version is the one that everybody wants. This is Wacko. It was released by Bally Midway in 1983. Wacko is known for its unusual slanted look. It's actually a very fun game to play, sort of rare among collectors, and is my wife's favorite game. This is Defender. It was created in 1980 by Williams. Williams was well known for creating pinball machines, and they decided to dabble in the arcade trade. Defender was developed and tested in a market, and it tested through the roof. It became one of the #1 games of the early 80s. If you notice, it has elaborate controls, and even to this day, only seasoned gamers can actually navigate it effectively. Burger Time is a game that came out in 1982. The premise of the game is you are Peter Pepper assembling hamburgers down at the bottom of the screen, but you're chased by hot dogs, eggs, and pickles. You'll have a pepper button that you can stun them for a short time to run past them, but generally they get pretty aggressive as the levels increase. This is the actual second video game that I owned as a collector. This is a game called the Three Stooges. It was released in 1984 by the company Milstar. The company unfortunately went out of business as this game was being produced, limiting it to about 200 units. The game itself isn't a very fun game to play, so operators didn't make a lot of money off of it. When it didn't make money, a lot of times they would bring it into their shop, paint the sides black, put a different game in it, and put it back out on the route, making this one very rare today with all its original artwork and a fully playable game. I would estimate that in existence there's probably about 15 of them today. This is Punch-Out! It was released by Nintendo and was the first game to offer the dual monitor concept. Today, Punch-Out games are very sought after by collectors. However, there are certain things that you have to note when trying to find an original. These Nintendo buttons that are orange are not the same as other games that have orange buttons. So this is something that you want to look for, is that it has the correct buttons, and then the knockout button was oftentimes ruined from people slamming it so hard. Today those buttons are extremely hard to find, and if you do find them, they're quite costly. This is Pole Position. It was released by Atari in 1982. It was one of the most advanced driving games of the time and still is known as one of the better driving games of the golden age of video arcade games. This was the #1 game in 1983. This is Spy Hunter. It came out in 1983 by Bally Midway. It was a major hit. Originally, the theme song was supposed to be the James Bond theme, but they couldn't get the rights to it in time, so they went with the Peter Gunn theme instead. Now that song is kind of synonymous with this game. However, in 1987, they came out with Spy Hunter 2, a very, very rare game today. However, Spy Hunter 2 is regarded as one of the worst, if not the worst sequel in video game history. This game is called Professor PacMan. It was made by Bally Midway to try and capitalize on the popularity once again of PacMan, which was a huge game back in the early 80s. So why not come out with other sequels and see how well they do? Well, Professor PacMan was limited to just under 400 units. 300 of them were immediately returned to the factory and converted to this game, Pac-Land. But of the remaining games, most of them were converted to something else, meaning a game was put into the existing cabinet and all the Professor Pac-Man stuff thrown out. Today, there are about 12 known in existence.